The first light of dawn crept slowly through the white curtains of Adelaide Cottage, casting a gentle golden glow across the bedroom where Prince William and Catherine had barely slept. Today was the day that would change everything. Today, William's father would become King Charles III, and their family would step into a new chapter of royal history. The house felt different somehow, filled with an electric energy that seemed to make even the air shimmer with anticipation. William stood before the full-length mirror in his dressing room, carefully adjusting the ornate ceremonial uniform that had been pressed to perfection by the palace staff. The deep blue fabric was adorned with golden braiding that caught the morning light, and each medal and decoration told a story of service and duty. His hands moved with practiced precision, but Catherine could see the slight tremor in his fingers as he fastened the final button. This was more than just getting dressed for a formal event. This was putting on the armor of responsibility that would define his future role as the heir to the throne. Catherine moved gracefully around their bedroom, her own preparations a dance of elegant efficiency. Her ivory gown hung on the wooden wardrobe door like a work of art, its silk fabric flowing like liquid moonlight. The dress had been chosen with careful consideration, striking the perfect balance between royal dignity and modern sophistication. Every detail had been planned months in advance, from the delicate pearl earrings that had once belonged to Princess Diana to the subtle shade of lipstick that would photograph beautifully under the Abbey lights. But even as she focused on these external details, her mind was constantly with her children, wondering how they were handling the magnitude of this day. Down the hallway, Prince George was already awake in his bedroom, sitting on the edge of his bed and staring at the miniature page of honor uniform that hung nearby. At 10 years old, he understood the weight of responsibility that came with his role in today's ceremony. The young prince had been practicing his duties for weeks, walking carefully with imaginary robes, learning the precise steps he would need to take, and memorizing the exact moment when he would need to help carry his grandfather's ceremonial garments. His sandy hair was still tousled from sleep, but his blue eyes were bright with determination and just a hint of nervous excitement. The palace staff had explained to George many times what would happen during the ceremony, but knowing about something and actually doing it were very different things. He thought about all the people who would be watching, not just in the Abbey but around the world through television cameras. The idea made his stomach flutter with butterflies, but he also felt a deep sense of pride. His grandfather had chosen him for this special role, and George was determined not to let anyone down. He reached out to touch the golden fabric of his uniform, feeling the weight of centuries of royal tradition in its carefully crafted threads. In the room next door, Princess Charlotte was already up and moving around with the confident energy that had become her trademark. At 8 years old, she possessed a natural poise that impressed everyone who met her. Charlotte had laid out her dress the night before, smoothing every wrinkle and making sure her special shoes were polished too. A mirror shine. She understood that today was about more than just a beautiful ceremony. Today was about family, about tradition, and about the special bond between a grandfather and his grandchildren. Charlotte had always been close to her grandfather Charles, sharing his love of nature and his gentle sense of humor. She remembered the quiet afternoons they had spent together in his garden, learning about different flowers and listening to his stories about the royal family's history. Now, as she brushed her long hair with careful strokes, she thought about how proud she was that her grandfather was going to be the king. She had been practicing her curtsy for weeks, determined to perform it perfectly when the moment came. Little Prince Louis, at 5 years old, was the wild card of the family. His room was already a whirlwind of activity as he bounced between his bed and the window, trying to see if there were any early visitors gathering outside their home. Louis had a reputation for being the most spirited of the Wales children, with an infectious laugh and an endless supply of energy that sometimes challenged his parents during formal events. But beneath his playful exterior, Louis also possessed a sweet sensitivity that showed he understood when something was truly important. His formal outfit had been chosen with extra care, designed to keep him comfortable during the long ceremony, while still maintaining the dignity required for such a historic occasion. Catherine had spent extra time explaining to Louis what would happen during the day, using simple words and lots of patience to help him understand why everyone was so excited and nervous. Louis nodded seriously during these conversations, his big eyes wide with the effort of taking in all the information. As the morning progressed, the family began to gather in the main hallway of Adelaide Cottage. William appeared first, his uniform now complete and his bearing transformed into the confident posture of a future king. Catherine followed, her beauty enhanced by the quiet strength that radiated from within. One by one, the children joined them, each looking remarkable in their formal attire but still unmistakably themselves. The house staff moved quietly around them, making final adjustments and ensuring that every detail was perfect. Camera crews waited outside, ready to capture the family's departure. But inside the cottage, there was a moment of peaceful intimacy. William gathered his family close, his arms reaching out to embrace Catherine and the children in a circle of love and support. In this quiet moment, William spoke to his children about the importance of the day ahead. His voice was gentle but serious as he reminded them that they were part of something much bigger than themselves. He told them about the long line of kings and queens who had come before them, and about the responsibility they all shared to serve their country with honor and dignity. George nodded solemnly. Charlotte smiled with confidence, and Louis listened with the intense concentration that he reserved for truly important conversations. Catherine added her own words of encouragement, reminding the children that their grandfather loved them deeply and that today was ultimately a celebration of family as much as it was a formal ceremony. She told them that it was okay to feel nervous, that even grown-ups felt scared sometimes when they had to do important things. But she also reminded them that they had been preparing for this day and that they were ready to make their family proud. The morning sun was climbing higher in the sky, and soon it would be time to leave for Westminster Abbey. The cars were waiting outside, polished to a brilliant shine and decorated with a royal standard. Security teams had been in position since before dawn, ensuring that every aspect of the journey would be safe and smooth. But inside Adelaide Cottage, the Wales family took one last moment to simply be together as a family before stepping out into the spotlight of history. William looked at each of his children's faces, memorizing this moment when they were still just his kids, excited and nervous about a big day ahead. Soon they would be part of a ceremony watched by millions, performing roles that would be remembered for generations. But right now, in the golden morning light of their family home, they were simply a father and mother preparing their children for one of the most important days of their young lives. The black royal Bentley gleamed like a jewel in the morning sunlight as it waited outside Adelaide Cottage. Its windows were polished to crystal clarity, and the royal coat of arms on the doors seemed to glow with golden fire. William felt his heart begin to race as he helped Catherine into the car, her ivory gown flowing like silk water as she settled into the leather seat. The children climbed in with careful movements, their formal clothes making them move with unusual precision and grace. George sat perfectly straight in his seat, his hands folded neatly in his lap as he had been taught. His page of honor uniform made him look older than his 10 years, and there was something different in his expression today. The playful boy who normally joked with his siblings had transformed into a young man who understood the weight of his responsibilities. Catherine reached over to squeeze his hand gently, and George responded with a small smile that showed both nervousness and determination dancing in his blue eyes. Charlotte positioned herself by the window with the natural grace that seemed to come so easily to her. Her dress was arranged perfectly around her legs, and her hair had been styled in a way that made her look like a princess from a fairy tale. At 8 years old, she possessed an intuitive understanding of royal protocol that sometimes surprised even her parents. She had been looking forward to this day for months, not just because of the ceremony itself, but because she knew how important it was to her beloved grandfather. Louis bounced slightly on his seat, his 5-year-old energy barely contained by the formal atmosphere inside the car. He pressed his nose against the window, his breath creating small clouds on the glass as he tried to see everything at once. His parents had worked hard to prepare him for this day, explaining over and over again that he would need to sit still and be quiet during the long ceremony. Louis had promised to be good, but everyone knew that asking a 5-year-old to remain perfectly still for hours was like asking the sun not to shine. As the convoy began to move, William felt a strange mixture of emotions washing over him. Pride, nervousness, excitement, and a deep sense of responsibility all swirled together in his chest. He looked at Catherine, who was gazing out at the gathering crowds with a serene expression that hid her own complex feelings about the day ahead. She had been born into a normal family, but had adapted to royal life with remarkable grace and strength. Today she would stand beside him as they watched his father become king, and William felt grateful beyond words to have her by his side. The streets of London had been transformed overnight into something magical. Red, white and blue bunting hung from every lamppost, window, and balcony. Union Jack flags fluttered in the gentle breeze like thousands of colorful butterflies. The normally busy roads had been cleared for the royal procession, but the sidewalks were packed with people who had been waiting since before dawn to catch a glimpse of the royal family. As their car moved slowly through the streets, the crowds began to cheer and wave. The sound started as a low murmur but quickly grew into a thunderous roar of celebration that seemed to shake the very buildings. George pressed his face closer to the window, amazed by the sea of people stretching as far as he could see. Men and women of all ages stood shoulder to shoulder, many wearing special hats or costumes decorated with royal symbols. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, waving small flags with enthusiasm that made George smile despite his nervousness. Charlotte began to wave back at the crowds, her movements elegant and measured. She had been practicing her royal wave for weeks, learning to move her hand in the slow, graceful motion that had been perfected by generations of royals before her. The people in the crowd responded to her waves with even louder cheers, and Charlotte felt a warm glow of happiness spreading through her chest. She could see the genuine joy on the faces of the people, and she understood that this was about more than just ceremony and tradition. This was about connection between the royal family and the people they served. Louis had abandoned any attempt at formal behavior and was now pressing both hands against the window, his face glowing with pure delight. He pointed excitedly at the colorful decorations, the funny hats people were wearing, and the enormous banners that stretched across the street. His parents had worried about how he would handle the attention, but Louis seemed to be thriving in the atmosphere of celebration. His infectious joy was visible even through the car windows, and the crowds responded with extra enthusiasm. Whenever they spotted the youngest prince, the car moved through different neighborhoods, each one decorated in its own special way. In some areas, the residents had organized street parties with tables full of food and drinks set up right on the sidewalks. In others, elaborate flower arrangements created tunnels of color that the royal convoy passed through like a dream. School children had been given the day off to watch the procession, and they stood in neat rows holding homemade signs and singing songs they had learned specially for the occasion. William pointed out landmarks to his children as they passed, sharing stories about the history of London and the royal family's connection to different parts of the city. He told them about the Tower of London, where the crown jewels were kept safe, and about Westminster Palace, where Parliament met to make laws for the country. George listened with intense interest, storing away every detail for future reference. Charlotte asked thoughtful questions that showed she was already thinking about her own future role in the royal family. The journey seemed to pass both quickly and slowly at the same time. The children were fascinated by everything they saw, but the adults in the car were acutely aware that each mile brought them closer to Westminster Abbey and the ceremony that would change their lives forever. William found himself thinking about his father, who would be making his own journey to the Abbey in a different car. After decades of waiting, Charles was finally about to become king, and William felt a complex mixture of pride and anticipation for what this would mean for their family. Catherine used the journey time to make final adjustments to the children's appearances, smoothing down a wrinkle here or fixing a piece of hair there. She spoke to them in quiet, encouraging tones, reminding them of the important moments they had practiced and reassuring them that they were ready for everything that lay ahead. Her calm presence helped to steady everyone's nerves, and William felt grateful once again for her strength and wisdom. As they approached Westminster Abbey, the crowds grew even thicker and more enthusiastic. The ancient church came into view like something from a fairy tale, its Gothic towers reaching toward the sky and its stone walls glowing golden in the morning sun. Flags from dozens of countries flew alongside the Union Jack, representing all the nations that would be watching this historic moment. The sound of church bells could be heard ringing across London, their bronze voices announcing to the world that this was no ordinary day. The car began to slow as they approached the Abbey entrance, and William felt his heart begin to beat faster. In just a few minutes, they would step out of their private family moment and into the full glare of international attention. Millions of people around the world would be watching as they walked up the Abbey steps, and every movement would be analyzed and remembered. But as he looked at his children's faces, William felt a surge of confidence and pride. They were ready for this moment, and together they would honor their family's long tradition of service and duty. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived as King Charles stepped forward to the ancient coronation chair. The chair itself seemed to glow with golden light, its carved wooden frame holding centuries of royal history within its sacred wood. George felt his heart beating so fast he was sure everyone could hear it as he prepared to perform his most important duty as page of honor. His small hands gripped the heavy ceremonial robes that he would help carry, and he could feel the eyes of the entire world watching his every movement. The Archbishop of Canterbury raised his voice in the ancient words of the coronation ceremony, his deep tones echoing through every corner of Westminster Abbey. The Latin phrases had been spoken at royal crownings for over 1,000 years, connecting this moment to all the kings and queens who had come before. Charles knelt before the Archbishop with dignity and grace, his silver hair catching the rainbow light that streamed through the stained glass. Windows high above. George moved forward with careful steps, his training taking over as he helped to arrange the magnificent robes around his grandfather's shoulders. The fabric was heavier than he had expected, made from the finest silk and decorated with golden threads that had been sewn by the most skilled craftsmen in Britain. Every movement George made was perfect, just as he had practiced hundreds of times in the weeks leading up to this day. His parents watched with barely contained pride as their eldest son performed his duties with the grace and dignity of someone much older. The St. Edward's crown was lifted high above Charles's head, its ancient gold gleaming like captured sunlight. The crown was decorated with precious gems that had been collected from around the Commonwealth, each stone representing a different part of the vast kingdom that Charles would now rule. Rubies from Burma sparkled like drops of blood, emeralds from South Africa glowed like captured forest light, and diamonds from Canada threw rainbows across the Abbey's ancient walls. As the crown was slowly lowered onto Charles's head, a complete silence fell over the Abbey. Even the youngest children seemed to understand that they were witnessing something sacred and eternal. The moment the golden circle touched the king's brow, trumpet fanfares erupted from every corner of the church, their triumphant notes announcing to the world that Britain had a new monarch. The sound was so powerful and joyful that it seemed to make the very stones of the Abbey vibrate with celebration. Charlotte felt tears of happiness sliding down her cheeks as she watched her beloved grandfather officially become the king. She had always known that this day would come eventually, but seeing it actually happen felt like watching a dream come true. The little princess performed her curtsy exactly as she had practiced, her movements flowing like water as she showed her respect to the newly crowned king. Her dress spread around her like the petals of a flower, and the golden light from the windows made her look like an angel. Louis had been sitting as still as a statue throughout the entire ceremony, his 5-year-old body practically trembling with the effort of being so well behaved. But when the trumpets began to play and the crowd erupted in cheers of joy, the little prince could not contain his excitement any longer. A huge smile spread across his face, and he began to clap his hands together with pure delight. The reaction was so genuine and sweet that even the most serious dignitaries in the abbey found themselves smiling along with him. William felt overwhelming emotions washing over him as he watched his father receive the crown that would one day be his own. Pride, love, fear, and hope all mixed together in his chest until he thought his heart might burst. He reached over to take Catherine's hand, squeezing her fingers as they shared this incredible moment together. His wife's presence beside him, it was like an anchor in the storm of emotions, reminding him that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family. The newly crowned King Charles stood slowly from the ancient chair, the weight of the crown on his head a physical reminder of the enormous responsibilities he had just accepted. His eyes found his family in the front row, and for just a moment, the formal mask of kingship slipped away to reveal the loving father and grandfather underneath. He gave William a small nod that spoke volumes about the bond between them and the shared understanding of what this moment meant for their family's future. Catherine watched the ceremony with the grace and dignity that had made her beloved by people around the world. Her ivory gown seemed to glow in the cathedral light, and her expression showed the perfect balance of joy and solemnity that the occasion required. She kept one protective hand on Louis's shoulder and used the other to dab at the happy tears that threatened to spill from her eyes. This was the moment when her children's lives changed forever. When they officially became part of the direct line of succession to the British throne, the ceremony continued with ancient rituals that had been performed at every coronation for centuries. Holy oil was blessed and applied to the king's hands and forehead, connecting him spiritually to his divine right to rule. The archbishop presented him with the orb and scepter, symbols of his temporal and spiritual authority over the realm. Each object was heavy with gold and precious stones, but even heavier with the weight of tradition and responsibility they represented. George remained at his position throughout all of these ceremonies, his young face serious with concentration. As he helped with each part of the ritual, the other pages and officials worked around him with practiced efficiency, but everyone could see that the young prince was performing his role with exceptional skill and maturity. His grandfather caught his eye several times during the ceremony, each glance filled with pride and gratitude for the perfect way George was representing their family. The choir's voices soared through the abbey like the songs of angels, their harmony so beautiful that many of the guests felt transported to another world entirely. The music was a mixture of ancient hymns that had been sung at coronations for centuries and newer compositions that had been written specially for this historic day. The combination of old and new reflected the way the monarchy itself was evolving, honoring its traditions while adapting to the modern world. As the formal crowning ceremony reached its conclusion, the entire congregation stood as one to sing the national anthem. 2,000 voices joined together in the familiar words, their combined song creating a sound so powerful and moving that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the ancient abbey. "God Save the King" rang out with such passion and conviction that everyone present felt connected to something much larger than themselves. The king began his procession back down the abbey aisle. Now wearing the full regalia of his office, the crown caught the light with every step he took, and his magnificent robes flowed behind him like a golden river. George and the other pages followed carefully, making sure that every fold of fabric was perfectly arranged. The young prince walked with his head held high, knowing that he had performed his duties flawlessly and made his family proud. The Wales family prepared to follow the king out of the abbey, their own procession marking the end of the most important ceremony of their lives. Charlotte and Louis had both behaved beautifully throughout the long service, showing a maturity and understanding that impressed everyone who witnessed it. As they stood to leave their seats, William felt a profound sense of completion and new beginning all at once. The coronation was over, but their new life as the family of the reigning monarch was just beginning. The ancient doors of Westminster Abbey opened like the gates to heaven itself, revealing an interior that took everyone's breath away. Golden light streamed through the magnificent stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the stone floor that had witnessed 1,000 years of royal ceremonies. The abbey's soaring arches seemed to reach toward God himself, and the air was thick with the scent of centuries-old incense and fresh flowers that had been arranged in towering displays of white lilies and red roses. William stepped through the doorway first, his ceremonial uniform catching the colored light that danced through the ancient windows. Behind him, Catherine moved with quiet grace, her ivory gown flowing like liquid silk across the stone floor. The children followed in careful formation, their eyes wide with wonder at the spectacular scene before them. The abbey was packed with guests from around the world, their formal clothes creating a sea of elegant colors that stretched from the front pews all the way to the back of the enormous church. Prince George felt his heart begin to pound as he took his first steps into the abbey. The sound of his footsteps echoed off the ancient walls, mixing with the soft murmur of conversation from the hundreds of guests who had come to witness this historic moment. His page of honor uniform felt heavier now, weighted with the responsibility of the role he was about to perform. George had practiced his duties countless times, but being inside the actual abbey made everything feel more real and more important than ever before. The young prince looked around at the incredible decorations that transformed the already beautiful church into something truly magical. Thousands of flowers had been arranged in careful patterns, their colors chosen to represent different parts of the Commonwealth. Golden fabric had been draped along the walls, and the altar area glowed with the warm light of hundreds of candles. The coronation chair, which had been used for royal ceremonies since the year 1308, sat waiting at the front of the abbey like a throne from a fairy tale. Charlotte walked beside her mother with a natural poise that had impressed everyone since she was very small. Her 8-year-old eyes took in every detail of the magnificent scene, from the elaborate headdresses worn by some of the international guests to the intricate carvings on the abbey's ancient pillars. She had been dreaming about this day for months, imagining what it would feel like to see her grandfather crowned as king in this most sacred of English churches. The little princess noticed how the lights seemed to dance and shimmer throughout the abbey, as if the very air was celebrating along with all the people who had gathered here. She could hear the soft sound of the organ playing gentle music in the background, its deep notes seeming to come from the very stones of the building itself. Charlotte felt a deep sense of pride swelling in her chest as she realized that she was part of something truly special, something that connected her to hundreds of years of royal history. Dad Louis held tightly to his mother's hand as they made their way to their seats in the front, the section of the abbey. At 5 years old, he was the youngest person to have such an important role in the ceremony, and everyone was watching to see how he would handle the pressure. The little prince's eyes were as wide as saucers as he stared up at the enormous arches that seemed to disappear into the shadows far above his head. He had never been in a building so big or so beautiful, and he felt very small in comparison to the grandeur surrounding him. The abbey was filled with the most important people from Britain and around the world. Kings and queens from other countries sat in places of honor, their crowns and jewels sparkling in the golden light. Prime ministers and presidents filled the rows behind them, all dressed in their finest clothes for this once-in-a-lifetime event. Religious leaders from many different faiths had come to witness the ceremony, representing the diversity of the modern Commonwealth that Charles would soon rule as King. As the family took their seats in the front row, William felt the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. He was sitting in the same spot where his mother, Princess Diana, had sat during important ceremonies, and where his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had watched so many significant moments in the life of the royal family. Soon his father would walk down the abbey's ancient aisle to be crowned, and William would officially become next in line to inherit this incredible responsibility. The sound of the great organ began to grow louder, its magnificent voice filling every corner of the abbey with music that seemed to come from heaven itself. The choir, dressed in white robes that made them look like angels, began to sing in voices so pure and beautiful that many of the guests felt tears coming to their eyes. Their song was in Latin, the ancient language of the church, but the emotion in their voices needed no translation. George felt a gentle tap on his shoulder and turned to see one of the senior palace officials giving him a reassuring nod. It was almost time for him to take his position as page of honor, and George felt his stomach fill with butterflies. He had been chosen for this role because his grandfather trusted him to do it perfectly, and George was determined not to let anyone down. He stood up carefully, smoothing down his uniform one last time before walking to his designated position near the altar. The moment had arrived for the most important part of the ceremony. The great doors at the back of the abbey opened once more, and a hush fell over the entire congregation. The sound of trumpets filled the air, their golden notes announcing the arrival of the king. Charles appeared in the doorway, dressed in magnificent robes that had been worn by kings for centuries. The St. Edward's crown, which would soon be placed on his head, was carried ahead of him on a special cushion by another group of pages. George took his position alongside the other pages, his young hands steady despite the nervous energy coursing through his body. He could see his grandfather approaching, looking both nervous and proud as he walked slowly down the aisle between the rows of guests. The little prince felt a surge of love and admiration for the man who had been such an important part of his life, and who was now about to become the King of England. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood waiting at the altar, his ceremonial robes making him look like a figure from a religious painting. In his hands, he held the ancient book that contained the words of the coronation ceremony, words that had been spoken at royal crownings for over 1,000 years. The golden light streaming through the stained glass window seemed to focus on the altar area, as if heaven itself was shining down on this sacred moment. Charlotte and Louis sat perfectly still in their seats, their eyes fixed on the incredible scene unfolding before them. Charlotte had been practicing her curtsy for weeks, knowing that she would need to perform it at exactly the right moment during the ceremony. Louis was trying his very best to sit quietly, though his little body was practically vibrating with excitement and nervous energy. As Charles approached the altar, the entire abbey seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment that everyone had been waiting for, the moment when he would officially become King Charles III. The weight of centuries of tradition filled the air, and every person present knew they were witnessing history in the making. The ancient stones of Westminster Abbey had seen many coronations, but each one was unique and special in its own way. The ceremony was about to begin, and the Wales family was ready to play their part in this incredible moment that would be remembered for generations to come. The journey back to Buckingham Palace felt like floating through a dream made of pure celebration. The golden state coach carrying the newly crowned King Charles rolled slowly through streets that had been transformed into rivers of joy and color. From every window, balcony, and rooftop, people cheered and waved with an enthusiasm that seemed to make the very air sparkle with happiness. The Wales family followed in their own carriage, their faces glowing with the satisfaction of a ceremony performed to perfection, and the anticipation of the magical moment that was still to come. George sat up straighter in his seat, still wearing his page of honor uniform with immense pride. The young prince had exceeded everyone's expectations during the ceremony, performing his duties with a grace and dignity that had impressed even the most experienced palace officials. His sandy hair was still perfectly combed despite the long day, and his blue eyes shone with the confidence that came from knowing he had made his family proud. Every few minutes he would touch the golden braiding on his uniform, still hardly believing that he had played such an important role in his grandfather's coronation. The crowds lining the streets seemed even larger and more enthusiastic than they had been during the morning journey to Westminster Abbey. Word had spread quickly that the ceremony had been absolutely perfect, and the people of London were ready to celebrate their new king with every ounce of energy they possessed. Union Jack flags fluttered from every available surface like thousands of colorful butterflies, and the sound of cheering voices created a symphony of joy that could be heard for miles around the palace. Charlotte pressed her face to the carriage window, her 8-year-old heart overflowing with happiness at the incredible scenes of celebration surrounding them. Her dress had remained perfectly clean and unwrinkled throughout the long day, and her hair still looked as beautiful as it had when they left Adelaide Cottage that morning. The little princess had discovered during the ceremony that she genuinely loved being part of these grand royal occasions, and she was already looking forward to many more special days like this one in the years to come. Louis bounced excitedly on his seat, his earlier good behavior during the ceremony having earned him the right to be a little more relaxed during the carriage ride. The 5-year-old prince pointed excitedly at all the decorations and celebrations he could see through the windows, his infectious joy making everyone in the carriage smile along with him. His formal clothes had survived the day remarkably well, though there were a few small wrinkles that showed he was still very much a little boy despite his royal responsibilities. William felt a deep sense of completion washing over him as they approached Buckingham Palace. The morning had begun with nervous anticipation and careful preparation, but now he felt only pride and satisfaction. His children had all performed their roles beautifully, representing their family and their future positions with a maturity that amazed him. Catherine had been a source of quiet strength throughout the entire day, and William knew that whatever challenges lay ahead in their new roles, they would face them together as a united family. Catherine gazed out at the celebrating crowds with tears of joy glistening in her eyes. She had watched her husband's father become king, had seen her eldest son perform his first major royal duty, and had witnessed her younger children behave with remarkable grace under enormous pressure. The ivory gown that had looked so perfect that morning now felt like a symbol of this transformative day, and she knew she would treasure the memories of wearing it for the rest of her life. As their carriage turned through the gates of Buckingham Palace, the family could see thousands of people already gathered in front of the famous building. The crowd stretched as far as the eye could see, a sea of faces all looking up expectantly at the palace balcony where they knew the royal family would soon appear. The anticipation in the air was so thick it seemed to shimmer like heat waves, and the excited chatter of the crowd created a constant buzz of energy that made everyone feel electric with excitement. Inside the palace, there was a brief moment of calm as the family gathered in the private rooms behind the famous balcony. Palace staff moved around them with quiet efficiency, making final adjustments to clothing and hair, ensuring that every detail would be perfect for the photographs that would be seen around the world. The king, still wearing his magnificent crown, took a moment to embrace each of his grandchildren individually, whispering words of pride and gratitude for their perfect behavior during the ceremony. George stood a little taller as his grandfather hugged him, feeling the weight of the crown against his cheek and understanding in that moment just how much trust had been placed in him. The young prince had proven himself ready for royal responsibility, and everyone in the family knew that this was just the beginning of many important roles he would play in the years to come. His parents exchanged glances over his head, their expressions showing both pride in what he had accomplished and awareness of the path that stretched ahead of him. Charlotte curtsied one more time to her newly crowned grandfather, her movements as graceful as a ballet dancer's. The little princess had found her calling during the ceremony, discovering that she not only enjoyed the pageantry and tradition of royal life but actually thrived under the attention and responsibility. Her natural poise and confidence suggested that she would become one of the monarchy's greatest assets as she grew older. The moment finally arrived for the family to step out onto the famous balcony. The tall French doors opened to reveal the incredible sight of the mall stretching out below them, packed with hundreds of thousands of people as far as the eye could see. The roar that went up from the crowd was unlike anything any of them had ever heard before, a sound of pure joy and celebration that seemed to shake the very walls of the palace. King Charles stepped forward first, the St. Edward's crown catching the afternoon sunlight and throwing golden sparkles across his face. The crowd's cheers grew even louder when they saw their newly crowned monarch, and Charles raised his hand in the traditional royal wave, his face glowing with happiness and gratitude for the overwhelming reception. Behind him, the Wales family arranged themselves in a perfect line, each person knowing exactly where to stand for the best photographs. William and Catherine flanked their children, their protective instincts combining with their royal training to create the perfect balance of family warmth and regal dignity. George waved with the measured movements he had been practicing, while Charlotte's natural grace made every gesture look effortless and elegant. Louis, unable to contain his excitement any longer, began waving enthusiastically with both hands, his genuine joy so infectious that it made the crowd cheer even louder. The red arrows chose that perfect moment to fly overhead in tight formation, their trails of red, white, and blue smoke painting the sky above Buckingham Palace with the colors of the Union Jack. The children looked up in wonder at the spectacular display, their faces filled with a kind of pure amazement that reminded everyone watching that beneath all the ceremony and tradition, they were still just children experiencing something magical. As the family stood together on the balcony, waving at the sea of celebrating faces below, they represented everything that was best about the British monarch. They were a modern family grounded in love and mutual support, yet deeply connected to centuries of tradition and service. The Coronation Day had shown the world that the future of the royal family was in excellent hands, with a new generation ready to carry forward the values of duty, dignity, and dedication that had sustained the monarchy through good times and challenging ones alike. The sun was beginning to set over London, casting a golden glow over the celebrating crowds and the palace balcony where the royal family continued to wave and smile. This had been a day that would be remembered for generations, a perfect blend of ancient tradition and modern family values that showed the monarchy adapting and thriving in the 21st century. For the Wales family, it marked not just the end of a perfect day, but the beginning of a new chapter in their lives as the family of the reigning king.